Hi everybody, I'm Professor Rad, and today we're going to talk about how you can use your calculator to find a mean, a standard deviation, and a variance for either a population or a sample. In this video, I'm going to go through using 6 different kinds of calculators. So basically, you just want to skip to the description and find the calculator that you have, then I'll go through the directions for that. So first, if you're not sure what kind of calculator you have, I'm going to show you the 6 that I'll be doing in this video. If the one that you have is not here and you're in my class, you can shoot me an email and tell me which calculator you do have, and I'll tell you how to identify that. So the first calculator I'm going to use is the Casio FX300ES Plus. The directions on here are also pretty similar if it's the FX115ES. Or if there's a plus or not. Okay? So this is the first one I'm going to go through. I'm also going to work through the TI-30XS Multiview, so we can look at the directions for this one. I will also be working through the TI-30X2S. So if you have this calculator, find the timestamp below. I will also be showing directions for the TI-34 Multiview, so you can find directions to this one. I'll be using the TI-36X Pro as well. And then lastly, if you have either a TI-84 Plus or a TI-84 Plus CE or a TI-83 or a TI-83 Plus, that kind of calculator, we'll show you for this one. All right, so go ahead and find the timestamp for your calculator, and we'll go ahead and find these values. All right, so I'm going to start out with the Casio FX300ES Plus, and we're going to find the population mean, standard deviation, and variance for this data set here. We're also going to make sure that we label our answers properly. So since all of these are labeled with minutes, we're going to keep that in mind. So to enter this data into your calculator, first we are going to make sure that we are in statistics mode. So to do that, I have a button here that says mode. So I'm going to press mode. And right now I'm in computation mode. I want to be in statistics mode, so I want to go to stat. So since there's a 2 there, I'm going to press 2 for stat mode. Now it's going to give me a lot of options, some of which I don't need right now. In fact, most of which. I want 1 var statistics. So 1 var stands for 1 variable. The only thing I have here are minutes, and that's my single variable. So I'm going to choose 1 for 1 var, and it creates this nice table for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter in the values from my data set into this table. So the first one is 39. Then I'll hit the enter. Yep, then I hit equals. Then I'll put in 38. Equals, and so on. Now, when I'm entering the data, it does not matter what order I'm putting them in. I just want to make sure that they're all here. I think I'm covering some up. I was 46 and 39. Okay, so I'm going to use these arrows to scroll through my data to make sure I didn't miss any. So we have 39, 46, 44, 47, 41, and 50, 49, and 36, 38, and 39. All right, so that's how I can enter in my data. Now I'm going to want to collect information about the data, so I don't want to type over any of the values that are here. So I'm going to hit AC, and that's just going to clear the screen. Notice that it says stat up here at the top. That means we are still in statistics mode. Next, I'm going to call up some data. So if I look at the bottom, do you see how above number 1 it says stat? So I'm going to press Shift 1, and that's going to bring up my statistics menu. So if I ever needed to go back into my data set, I would hit 2 for my data. That'll take me right back to that table. But instead, I want to pull up some different values. I want to find the mean, the standard deviation, ultimately the variance. So VAR stands for variable. So that's what I'm going to choose. So I'm going to choose option 4. And now it tells me a few different things. So my calculator says N. That'll tell me how many numbers I entered. X bar is going to tell me the mean, whether it's for a sample or a population. It's going to use X bar. This symbol is its attempt at a sigma. So we have sigma X. So if I need a population standard deviation, I'm going to choose option 3. And SX is for a sample standard deviation. So if I want a sample standard deviation, I'm going to choose option 4. In this case, they want us to find the population mean. So I'm going to choose 2. And it'll tell me X bar here. I have to hit equals for it to give me the answer. So my answer is 42.9. And since these are minutes, it's going to be 42.9 minutes. Next, I want to find that population standard deviation. So I'm going to go to the same menu. I'm going to hit Shift 1 to come up to my statistics menu. Option 4 for variables. And this time, since I want a population standard deviation, I'm going to use the sigma X option. So I'm going to choose option 3. Again, it's going to tell me sigma X, and I have to hit equals in order to get the answer, which is 4.7. So this is 4.7 minutes. Lastly, to get my variance, I have 2 options. So to get the variance, what I could do is type in my standard deviation and press the X squared button because that's our formula for variance. And that'll give me 22.09 minutes squared. But that worked in this case because our standard deviation was a nice number, 4.7. But let's say our standard deviation was pretty gross looking, like 4.719638542, and then it just goes off the screen. So in that case, I'm going to go back to my statistics menu by pressing Shift 1. I'm going to choose option 4 for variables. I'm going to choose option 3 for my standard deviation. And then I'm going to press X squared. So what it'll do is it'll take whatever decimal is stored for the standard deviation and square it. I'll press equals, and we can see I get that 22.09. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to pause the video for a moment and repeat the... Oh, actually, no, don't do that. Don't pause. I have to show you how to clear the data out. Sorry. So I'm going to press AC to clear off my screen again. And then I'm going to go to Shift 1 for stat. I'm going to go to 2 for data. And then I can keep pressing delete to get rid of my data values. So that will clear the whole thing out. Then to get out of statistics mode, I'm going to go to my mode button and choose 1 for computation. And you can see there's no longer any stat up here at the top. So that's how you can clear out of statistics mode. Okay, now, now to practice those steps, you should pause the video and reperform those steps for this data set. The difference is instead of choosing that option sigma X, you're going to choose the option SX because we have a sample standard deviation. So I'm going to ask you to pause, put that data in. I'm going to do the same, and we can compare our answers. Okay, so let's see how you did at finding the sample summary values. So for my sample mean, I got 5 people. For my sample standard deviation, I got 2.56. And for the sample variance, I got 6.6. So the way that I did that, just to review, was I made sure that I was in statistics mode. And then I entered in all of my data. Then I press Shift 1. I'm going to choose option 4 for the variables. Option 2 gave me that 5 people. And then option 4 gave me my sample standard deviation. So that's how I got that 2.56. Then to finish it, I went to option 4 again, pressed X squared, and hit equals, and that gave me the sample variance. All right, so if you came here to look at the Casio calculator, I hope you found this helpful. Next, I'm going to be looking at the TI-30XS Multiview. All right, so let's go ahead and find how we can, let's go ahead and work through finding summary values on the TI-30XS Multiview, which is right up here. So to do this, we are mostly going to be using this key that says data and stat right above it. So if I press data, that's going to bring me up to some data tables where I can enter in the values. So even though this data set is presented to us in 2 rows, I'm going to enter it all into a single column. So I'm going to type in 39 and then press enter, 38, press enter, 36, 49, and so on. So I'm just going to keep typing in the values in my data set. And once I've got that all in, I can use my up and down arrows to scroll through the data and make sure I didn't make a mistake. So we've got 39, 46, 44, 47, and so on. Okay. Once I have the data in, I'm going to press second mode to quit this screen. But don't worry, your data is still there. For example, if I hit data, it's still there. But this would just allow me to do some calculations or whatever. I don't want to mess up my data with the next step, so that's why I like to get back to this kind of blank screen. Now I'm going to access the stat menu to be able to pull up the mean standard deviation. So I'm going to press second data, and that brings up my stats menu. Here I have 2 options. I could do 1 variable statistics, that's 1 var stats, or 2 variable statistics. For right now, we're going to use 1 var stats, so I'm going to choose option 1 by pressing 1. Now it's going to ask me, where is this data stored? So we stored the data in the first column, so I want L1 highlighted. FRQ is if you had like lots of numbers that repeated, or if you're using a frequency distribution, which we're not going to do for our class. So we're just going to keep this on 1 for our class. And then I scroll down to calc. So I'm going to hit enter. And now it's going to tell me all kinds of good stuff. So it tells me, for example, n is 10. That means we entered in 10 numbers. If I press the down arrow, it's going to tell me X bar is 42.9. So that means that my mean is 42.9. This calculator uses X bar whether you have a population or a sample. And if I look at what I got here, I also had 42.9 minutes. Okay, so that means we're doing good work. If I keep scrolling down, you'll notice it tells me SX and sigma X. So my calculator doesn't know inherently whether this is a population or a sample, so it's going to tell me both. So in this case, we want the population standard deviation. So I want sigma X for the population. If this was a sample, I would want SX. And so it tells me 4.7. Now to get the variance, what I'm going to do is while I'm highlighting the standard deviation here, I'm going to hit enter. And you can see it puts sigma X on the screen. I'm going to press X squared because that's how you find the variance. It's the standard deviation squared. And then I'll press enter. And I'm going to use this left-right arrow so I get it in decimal format. And I get 22.09. So 22.09 minutes squared. And that's how we find the variance. Now, if I go back to that menu, second data, and I want to go to my 1 variable statistics, and I go through that again, I can continue to scroll down. So this calculator will give me even more information. In particular, this calculator will give me a 5-number summary. So it tells me the minimum value is 36, the first quartile is 39, the median, Q3, and the maximum. Now, I do want to point out that calculators use a different technique than we did when we found our 5-number summary. So if you find a 5-number summary by hand, it might be different from the 5-number summary our calculator just gave us. All right, so now I want to clear out the data. So I'm going to go back to data, and I'm just going to hit delete until all the data is gone. So there we go, and then I'll hit second mode, and I'm back to the home screen as if nothing had happened. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to pause the video here and work through this next example on your calculator. So now we have a brand new data set, and this time we're going to find the sample mean and the sample standard deviation, and then the sample variance. So I'm going to ask you to pause the video, and then when you unpause, you can compare your answers to mine. Okay, so let's see how we did. So I entered in my data, and then I pulled up the 1var stats. I have an X bar of 5 people. This time we wanted to find the sample standard deviation S. So I used SX on the calculator instead of sigma X. So that's how I got 2.56 instead of 2.40. Then I kept that 3 highlighted and hit enter, and X squared to get me that variance of 6.6 squared people. All right, so I hope this helped you with your TI-30XS Multiview. Next, we're going to go through the TI-30X2S. All right, let's go through using the TI-30X2S to find some summary statistics values. So first, what I'm going to do is I have to put this calculator into statistics mode. So mostly we're going to be using these 2 buttons here. So I'm going to see how this says stat above the data key. So I'm going to press second data. And there are different statistics modes that this calculator will do. So I want, for this example, to be in 1var stats. So that's where we want to be for right now. In the future, we'll look at 2var. But right now I want 1 variable. So since it's underlined, I'm going to press equals to select it. And down here at the bottom, it now says stat. So that's how I know I'm in statistics mode. Next, I want to enter in my data. So I'm going to press the data button, and it's going to tell me x1 equals. So I'm going to have to enter in all of the data values in the data set. So the first one is 39, so I'm going to type in 39. And then I'm going to press down, and it's going to tell me FRQ1. So if I were entering data from a frequency distribution, I would change this to whatever the frequency was. But since this is just individual data values, I'm going to keep that at 1. I'll press down again, and now it tells me to enter in x2. So x2 is 38. I'm going to press down, skip over frequency, and now type in 36. And I'm going to keep doing this for all of my data values. Oops. Okay. And once I have those all entered, I can scroll through the data set by pressing the up or down arrows to make sure I've got them all in there properly. So I'm going to go backwards through the data, 39. And also, it doesn't matter the order you type the numbers in. They can be out of order, that's okay. What's important is that you have them all in here, and they are in here correctly. Okay, so it looks like I've got all the data values in there properly. Next, I'm going to ask my calculator to do the math for me. So to do that, I'm going to press this button that says stat var. That stands for statistics variables. And it's going to do some calculations. And across the top, it's going to tell me all the good stuff. So it's going to tell me n. What that means is there were 10 numbers in my data set. If I scroll to the right, it tells me x bar. And this calculator is going to use x bar for both the population and the sample mean. So it found the same population mean as I had written on the page, 42.9. And since these were all labeled with minutes, I want to make sure I label that with minutes as well. Now, my calculator will use SX for a sample standard deviation and sigma x for population standard deviation. It doesn't know which one I need, so it's going to tell me both. In this case, we want to find the population standard deviation. So I'm going to scroll over to sigma x. Now, you'll notice there's a tiny little arrow here. I could keep scrolling and find some other things, but we're not going to use those for our class. With sigma x underlined, I'm going to hit enter, and you can see it puts sigma x here. Now I'm going to press x squared equals, and that's how I can find my population variance. So in this case, we have 22.09 squared minutes. Okay, so once I've found all the things that I need to find, I want to exit out of the statistics mode. So to do that, just above stat var, it says exit stat. So I'm going to press second stat var. Are you sure you want to exit statistics? Yes. And now that stat that was on the bottom is no longer there because I'm no longer in statistics mode. All right, so what I'm going to ask you to do is to pause the video and try this out on your own, this other example. Now, in this case, we're going to be finding a sample mean and a sample standard deviation and a sample variance. So the only difference is you're going to want to use SX instead of sigma x for the standard deviation. So go ahead and pause the video here, and when you're all set, you can unpause and we will check our answers. All right, so let's see how we did. So I got an X bar of 5 people, a standard deviation of 2.56 people, and a sample variance of 6.6. So I'm going to walk you through how I did that. So I made sure I entered into statistics mode. I pressed second data, and then I hit 1 var. Then for my data, I went through and entered all the values, keeping the FRQ the same. And then when I go to stat var, for n, it tells me 8 because I typed in 8 numbers. For x bar, we have 5. And this time, since we have a sample, I wanted to use SX. If you had 2.40, that meant you use sigma x. Okay, so I want to use SX for sample to get 2.56. I selected that and squared it to get my 6.6 for the sample variance. All right, so that's how we use a TI-30X2S to do some statistical analysis. Next, I'm going to do the TI-34 Multiview. All right, so here's how we use the TI-34 Multiview to do some statistical analysis for us. So first I need to enter my data into the calculator. We're mostly going to be using this data button, and above it you can see it says stat, so we'll be using the second data button as well. But to enter in our data, we're going to press data, and it creates this data table for us. Now, in this case, there are multiple columns, but we're only going to use the one column because we only have a single type of variable. We just have minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and type in the first value, 39, and hit enter, and then 38, and so on. Now, it does not matter what order you're typing the numbers in. Your calculator will analyze the data just the same. Now, when I get to the bottom, I want to make sure I entered those numbers in correctly. So I'm going to scroll back through and compare. So 39, 46, 44, 47, 41, 50, 49, 36, 38, and 39. So good, I've got my data properly entered. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to quit. So I'm going to hit second mode. That's going to quit the view. What that means is the data is still stored in the calculator, but it's not displayed on screen, so I can't mess it up. Next, I'm going to access the statistics menu. So I'm going to press second data to get my stats menu. Now, in the future, we're going to look at some 2 var stats, but right now we want 1 var stats. This again stands for one variable statistics, and we only had one variable. We had minutes that we were looking at. So I'm going to select option 1. And then the calculator needs to know where to look. So I'm looking in that first column, so I want L1 to be highlighted. FRQ stands for frequency. So if I was entering data from a frequency distribution, I would tell the calculator where those frequencies were stored, but I'm not going to do that for this class at all, so I'm just going to keep that at 1, and then I'm going to calculate. And then it tells me all sorts of good stuff. So N is the number of numbers that I entered in. X bar is my mean. And this calculator uses X bar whether the data set is a population or a sample. It doesn't know which one it is, but it knows it's the same formula, so it's just going to use X bar to represent mean. So in this case, I would use mu, but the calculator says X bar. Next, it's going to tell me both sample and population standard deviation. So it uses SX for the sample standard deviation and sigma x for the population standard deviation. So I need to know which one I'm looking for. In this case, they wanted us to find the population standard deviation, so I would go for sigma x. To get the variance, I have to find sigma x squared. So with that 4 highlighted, I'm going to hit enter, and it'll put sigma x there for me. Then I can press x squared and hit enter. Now this calculator is giving me a mixed number, so I'm going to hit the double arrow to get the decimal form 22.09. And then remember, for variance, we're going to square our answer. Now, I do want to show you also, if I go back to 3 stat vars, that'll pull up all this info again. And if we keep scrolling, this is going to tell us some other stuff. But I'm not going to ask you for the other stuff that's on here. So yeah, so that's, you don't have to worry about that. If I wanted my sample standard deviation, again, I would have just chosen SX instead of sigma x. Now that I'm all done with the problem, I'm going to clear the data out. So I'm going to go to data, and then I'm just going to keep pressing delete until all those numbers are gone. If I hit second mode, it brings me back to the main screen as if nothing had ever happened. So what I would like you to do is I'd like you to pause the video here and repeat those steps, but now for this new data set. So practice using your calculator. The difference here is this is sample data instead of population data. So you're going to want SX this time instead of sigma x. So once you've got that all set up, you can unpause the video and then check to see how you did. All right, so let's see how you did. So I got an X bar of 5 people. So my mean was 5 people. For my sample standard deviation, I had 2.56. If you had 2.39 or 2.40, that means you looked at the population standard deviation instead of S, the sample standard deviation. And then for the variance, I got 6.6 when I rounded it. So hopefully this helped you use your TI-34 Multiview. Next, I'm going to look at the TI-36X Pro. All right, let's go through using your TI-36X Pro to find summary values for a data set. So on this calculator, we are mostly going to be using this data button to pull up some good information. So that's what I'm going to go first. I'm going to press data, and it pulls up like a data table. Now, even though this data is presented kind of horizontally, I'm going to enter it all vertically into one column, and that's because this data set is a single variable data set. What that means is we just have minutes happening here. So I'm going to type in 39 and then press enter, and then 38 and press enter, and so on. So I'm going to continue entering the data in this manner in that first column. It does not matter what order you type this in. You just want to make sure you get all those numbers in there. When you've hit the end, if you want to go through and check, you can use the scrolly button to scroll through your data and make sure that you've got everything in there. Yeah, looks like I got them all in right. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to quit. So I'm going to hit second mode. And what that does is it keeps the data stored in there. Like if I press data, it's still there. So it keeps the data in the calculator, but it clears the screen so that I don't mess the data up. Next, I'm going to go to the stat-reg-distr, and that stands for statistics, regression, distribution, basically all the things we want to find for statistics. So to get to that menu, I'm going to press second data, and it brings me up all this wonderful good stuff. Right now, we're going to want one var stats because we have this one variable of minutes. So I'm going to scroll down to 2 and press enter. Now, the calculator needs to know where to pull the information from. So the data, we typed that all into the first column, so we want L1 highlighted. Then FRQ stands for frequency. So if we were entering the data from a frequency distribution, then we could have entered those frequencies into another column and we would have selected that. In this case, the data just happened once, and I'm not going to ask you ever to use a frequency distribution for your calculator, so we can just leave that on 1, and then I'll hit calc. And now it comes up with a list of all this glorious good stuff. It gives me a lot of things. So the first thing it tells me is 10. That's our sample size. It means I entered 10 values into the data set. The next thing it tells me is the sample mean or the population mean. Since the formula is the same, the calculator is only going to tell me X bar, but that's also the same as mu for the calculator's sake. So we had a mean of 42.9, so we have 42.9 minutes. Next, in this example, we wanted a population standard deviation. So instead of SX, I want sigma X. So sigma is 4.7 minutes. If this was a sample, I would use the 4.95. Then to get my variance, I'm going to, while the 4 is highlighted, press enter. And you can see it puts sigma X there. Then I'll press X squared and enter again. Now it's giving me the mixed number format, so to get it in decimal form, I'm going to hit this conversion button, and we get 22.09 squared minutes. Now, just so you can see some of the other things that are in this menu, once you've already analyzed the data, you could do a shortcut and just pick stat vars. And as I scroll through, it gives me some other stuff that I'm not going to ask you to use, but notice it has the minimum value, the first quartile, the median, the third quartile, and the maximum. So this calculator will also give me a 5-number summary. Just be careful because the technique that we use to find a 5-number summary for our class and the technique the calculator uses are different. So sometimes this 5-number summary can be different from the one that we find when we find it by hand. All right, so now that we've completed the problem, I'm going to go back into the data set and I want to clear out this data. So to do that, I'm just going to keep pressing delete until all the data is gone. And now it's all cleared and ready to use again. In fact, if I hit second mode, they'll never know we were here. Ta-da! All right, so I have a second example here for us to try on our own. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to pause the video and see if you can use your calculator to find the summary values for this data set. This time, you're going to be finding a sample mean and a sample standard deviation, and then the sample variance. So instead of sigma X, you're going to want to find SX. So pause the video here and work through it. I'll work through it as well, and then we can compare our answers. Okay, and let's see how we did. So I had a mean of 5 people, a standard deviation of 2.56 people, and a sample variance of 6.6 squared people. So just a reminder, we wanted the sample standard deviation, so I selected SX instead of sigma X. So if you had 2.40, that means you chose the population standard deviation instead of the sample standard deviation. And if I select that and square it and change the format, that gives me my decimal value for the sample variance. And then again, just as a rehash of how I found this, I went to the data section, typed all the values into here. Then I quit the screen and I hit second data. I chose option 2 for 1 var stats, chose the correct options and hit enter, and then it gave me all this delicious stuff. All right, so that's how you can use your TI-36X Pro to summarize your statistics values. Next, we're going to wrap up this video by using a TI-84 Plus. Okay, so let's use our graphing calculator to find the summary statistics values. Now, in this case, I'm using a TI-84 Plus CE. The CE just means it's the color edition. So if you have a TI-83 or a TI-84 Plus, this technique will work for that. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to enter in the data, and then we'll use the calculator to call up the different functions we need it to use. So I'm going to use this button Stat. And to input the data, I'm going to choose option 1 for Edit. So I'm going to press 1. And it gives me a bunch of columns. So this is where I'm able to enter in data for whatever data I have. In this case, I only have one type of data. I just have these minutes. So even though they're in a couple rows, I'm going to enter all of these numbers into that single column because I want it all stored in the same place. So I'm going to type in 39 and then hit enter, 38, and so on. Now, it does not matter what order you put these numbers in. So as long as you get all the numbers in there, you will be good to go. And then if I want to scroll back through the numbers, I can use these arrow buttons to make sure I've got these in here properly. So we have 39, 46, 44, 47, 41 and 50, 49 and 36. Yep, looks like I've got them in good. Next, what I'm going to do is I don't want to mess up that data I just entered, especially if my data set's really big. So I'm going to quit the screen. To do that, I'm going to press second mode. And it brings me back to my home screen as if we haven't done anything. But the good news is it's still stored in the calculator. So if I went back to Stat and Edit, all of my data is still there. Now I want the calculator to calculate for me. So I'm going to go back to Stat. And see how there are 3 options here, Edit, Calc, and Tests? I want to go over to the Calc menu. So I'm going to press this button here. And it'll bring me to the Calculate menu. And it gives me lots of options depending on what I want to do. So for this type of stuff, we want 1 var stats. That means 1 variable statistics. And we have 1 variable, just the minutes. So I'm going to choose option 1. And now it wants to know, okay, where do I find this stuff? So all of our data was in L1. So I'm going to press enter there. Freq list, or the frequency list, what that means is if we were entering our data from like a frequency distribution, then we could list the categories and then the frequencies. I'm not ever going to ask you to do that, so we're just going to leave that blank, and then we'll go to calculate. Now, I'll also point out, depending on how old your calculator is, you might not have this menu. It might go directly to all the good stuff, and that's totally fine. So this is telling us our population mean, and then some other stuff. And then it's got SX and sigma X. So SX is a sample standard deviation, and sigma X is a population standard deviation. So for this data set, we wanted a population mean and standard deviation. So we have our population mean and our population standard deviation, sigma X. Now, it doesn't tell us the variance. I'll tell you how you get that in just a moment. But if I wanted to scroll through, see how this down arrow is here? That means I can continue to scroll through to get more information. So this calculator will also give me a 5-number summary. So it's telling me the minimum, the Q1, the median, the Q3, and the maximum. So the 5-number summary that's on this calculator is found a little bit differently than the 5-number summary that we did by hand. So these numbers might not match up what you find by hand. Okay, so there are 2 ways that we can find the variance. So the first way is by typing in our population standard deviation. And notice as soon as I started typing, it cleared that out. And then I'll press X squared and hit enter. And that's how I can get the 22.09. But let's suppose our standard deviation was really gross and I didn't want to have to type the whole decimal in. Here's how I can access it completely. So I'm going to go to vars. That stands for variables. And this is another way to call up those different kinds of variables. I have lots of options, but notice number 5 says statistics. Now, again, depending on your version of your calculator, you may have more or less options here. So you want to go to the one that says statistics. And it gives us all the different variables that we can pull up. So since this is a population standard deviation, I'm going to go to sigma x. If I was looking for a sample variance, I would select SX. So I'm going to highlight by sigma x and hit enter. And now it uses that symbol there. I can press x squared and enter, and it will tell me the the population variance. And then lastly, remember for variance, the units are squared. Then to finish this up, I want to delete the data out so that it's clean next time I need it. So I'm going to go to Stat, go back to Edit. Now, there's a shortcut way to do this. I can scroll up so that L1 is highlighted and press Clear. Now it's showing L1 equals nothing. So if I hit Enter, it will clear the whole column out. And if I hit Second Quit, it's like we were never there at all. All right, so I'm going to ask you to try using your calculator on this example. So here we have a data set of people, and they want us to find the sample mean, sample standard deviation, and sample variance. So I'm going to ask you to pause the video here to work through that, and then you can unpause and we'll compare your answers to mine. All right, and let's see how we did. So I got an X bar, a sample mean of 5 people, a standard deviation of 2.56 people, and a variance of 6.6 squared people. So X bar was 5, they told me that. And then since they want a sample standard deviation, I used SX instead of sigma X this time. So that's why I got 2.56 instead of 2.40. Then to get my variance, I went to vars, 5 for statistics. I went over to SX this time because I have a sample variance, squared it, and got 6.6 when I rounded. All right, so that's going to wrap up using your TI-84 Plus calculator to find some summary values. In fact, that's going to wrap up this video. So I hope you found this helpful in using your calculator to find summary statistics. And in the next video, we are going to go back to using some formulas and talk about how you can find what's called a z-score, which tells you kind of like how far apart, like how you performed with relationship to the mean. And then I also wanted to mention, if your calculator was not in this video, again, and you're in my class, you can just kind of look at the top of the calculator and email me that, or you could email me a picture of your calculator, again, if you're in my class, and I can tell you how to use it. All right, I hope you found this helpful, and yeah, have a fantastic day. Bye, everyone.